So now we've reached a point where I would like to discuss how to use the shot clock, what settings you can change, and kind of show you a quick demo on how everything all ties together. So the first option in the clock settings is to either use a shot clock or don't. So if this is toggled and it's red, that means that you are using the clock. If you click it and it turns gray, that means that the clock will disappear. The three base settings are the default, which is basically the amount of time that each player has to shoot during a standard shot. The extension is the amount of time that we add to the clock when somebody calls an extension. And this is the amount of time that the breaking player has to either execute a shot or call a push out after the break. If you want to use extensions, this is where you would enter them. So let's just assume that John's a stronger player. He may only need one. Joe may be the weaker player. We're going to give him 2. And this final box, it's used by CSI. I'm not sure if any other leagues use it. But the purpose of this is when both players are on the hill, you have the option to grant each player an additional number of extensions. By the default rule set, both players usually only just have one extension apiece, but when they are both on the hill, they both get an additional extension. So for the break settings, in more your rotation games, like 9-ball and 10-ball, you do have the option to call a push out after the break. The most basic way to explain the push out is that after a player breaks, he or she may not like the way the table's laid out, or they may be hidden. Maybe they can't hit the first ball. For whatever scenario, in these rotation games, breaking player can call a push out, which basically means they can do just about anything they want with the cue ball other than foul. After they hit the cue ball, nothing has to hit a rail, nothing has to hit a particular ball. And then the incoming player would have the option to look at the table and decide whether they want to play the table the way it lies or pass it back to the original breaker. So this time amount down here is the amount of time we're going to grant the incoming player or the non-breaking player to kind of make up his or her mind. The alternate break should be pretty self-explanatory, as opposed to winner breaks where you win a rack, you break, you win a rack, you break. This is going to alternate in between players regardless of who won the rack. You may or may not want to use this, but it is an option that is available. The keep screen awake option is something that you may or may not need to use, and it may not work on all devices, but it should work on most. Essentially what this does is when this is turned on, it's going to kind of prevent your phone or device from kind of going and falling asleep due to non-activity. But to be honest, if you're using the shot clock, you should be interacting with the device frequently enough that it probably won't time out anyway. Just keep in mind that if you do have this on, there is a possibility it may use a little bit more battery life. So now we're going to go into our match, and I'm going to kind of show you how the clock works, how to call the extensions. This should be pretty brief. The way you want to use this is that once John breaks and all the balls are done moving, all the balls are done spinning, you'll go ahead and you'll start the clock. John gets to the table, realizes that he does not like the table layout, and he wants to call maybe a push out. So we are not going to hit the push out button until A, John makes contact with the cue ball, all the balls stop rolling, and John gets out of the way so that Joe can actually approach the table. So once that happens, we're going to go ahead and click push out. Now the clock did reset in the background to 60 seconds, and you can just go ahead and restart it. Now Joe has 60 seconds to make up his mind. Joe can and has the option, even after the 60 seconds, if he doesn't like, the table layout, still needs some more time, Joe can call an extension. The way you do that is you just click on the clock under the player's name. So right now we see Joe has 2 extensions, John has 1. So we will click this. The clock is extended 45 seconds, or whatever setting that you have. There technically is no rule that I've ever found that prevents a player from calling back-to-back extensions. It will work in the app if that's what you, or if that's how you decide that you want to play. And there you go. So now once this clock is red, that means obviously Joe has no more extensions. So Joe finally shoots. All the balls are done moving, they're done spinning, Joe's out of the way, John has access to the table. You have 2 options. Once Joe makes contact with that cue ball, you could pause the clock, okay? Or what's a little bit faster is just hit reset to 45. It resets it for you, clock is paused, and then you start it once John gets to the table. One final note about the extensions. If you remember, we were going to give both players an additional extension when they were both on the hill. So if we go back to our match, give Joe some wins, Joe's on the hill. Now we're going to get John on the hill. And just watch the green clocks. Now John has an extra one. He went from 1 to 2, and Joe went from 2 to 3. So that's why that box is there. The minute somebody comes off the hill, like maybe you made a mistake or you just hit, you gave somebody a win when you didn't mean to. The minute you take one player off the hill, then they do default back to the extensions that you started with. So one last thing that I'll mention is that any of these settings that you change, they're not going to change again until you actually physically go in and change them. So let's just imagine that John's going to use this app to keep score against somebody else. He's going to play somebody named Bob. But maybe he doesn't want Bob to have 2 extensions. Well, what's going to happen is he's going to type in Bob. We're going to go to the match, and no surprise, Bob has 2 extensions. Now the last thing I want to show is just what the clock looks like as it runs down. To kind of save a little bit of time, I did set the default time amount to 17 as opposed to 45. So let's go ahead and get that clock set at 17. We're going to start it running. You will see how the clock starts to change color. After 10 seconds, it'll turn red, and you'll hear the audible beeps that you should be hearing now. Once it gets down to 0, it's going to clearly tell you, that the player has committed a time foul, assuming that he or she did not actually make contact with the cue before that clock went down.